teleSUR. I'm Doris Polo in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the South. One day away from presidential elections, tensions across Bolivia remain near an all-time high. International observers were the main target of the de facto administration this past week, as on Friday, Argentinian lawmaker Federico Fajoli was arrested upon arriving to the El Alto airport. The congressman was held in detention for a number of hours without being charged, before eventually being released. The persecution of international electoral observers has become the latest tactic of the coup regime, as they claim these observers are in Bolivia to sow violence.
Last thing we need are biased missions that are not here really to protect the electoral process, but with their own agenda, political agenda. We don't want that. We're here just to state facts, and we're here also to tell, if it's needed, that the role of observer is not to intervene. It's to observe, to be patient, and to wait for the facts to come. Because what happened last year, it was that first was an opinion, a strong one, and afterwards, any evidence followed. There wasn't really hard evidence of the claims that OAS had. So we don't want to make this mistake, and we're here to do it the right way.
For their part, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has called on Bolivia's coup regime to respect human rights.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has urged Bolivia's authorities, political and other actors to refrain from any actions that could undermine the peaceful conduct of the general elections that are taking place this Sunday. It is essential, the High Commissioner says, that all sides avoid further acts of violence that could spark a confrontation. No one wants to see a repeat of last year's events, which led to extensive human rights violations and abuses, including at least 30 people killed and more than 800 injured, and ultimately to everyone losing out.
Meanwhile, the president of the Chamber of Deputies, Sergio Choque, has made a call on the population to take part in the ballots, while also inciting political players to refrain from promoting any violence this weekend.
We are broke economically, but that will not prevent us from facing this challenge that our homeland has presented to us. We must all participate and vote for a pair of running mates that we support, whoever they may be, so that they can take our country out of this economic crisis in which we have been plunged due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and also as a result of public mismanagement that had been carried out. We Bolivians are working so that the country's economy can grow again. In this regard, I ask those people or certain figures to stop trying to intimidate the population, to stop seeking to disrupt the country. I ask them to call for the unity of Bolivians. We have to respect the decisions shown at the ballot boxes.
While the spokeswoman for the Inter-American Union of Electoral Organizations, Pamela San Martin, also spoke about how her team will work to ensure transparency in these elections.
Uniones mission has two parts. One is the presidential part with 9 members, and on the other hand, there is a virtual accompaniment, which has been the new form of observation taking place due to the COVID-19 pandemic and travel restrictions. But the aim is to be able to provide full support by a group of authorities participating from different countries. On September 25th, we started a virtual advance mission in which we met with different authorities of the Supreme Electoral Tribunal, academics and civil society organizations, precisely in order to learn of elements of the activities that had been carried out thus far by the tribunal, and the way in which it was facing the challenges unleashed both by a complex political context, taking into account the recommendations that were issued on the elections of last year, and also a particular context in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, which requires the adoption of specific measures by the authorities in order to guarantee the right to health of all Bolivians.
Moving on, Costa Rican protest leaders have announced a stop to mobilizations until October 21st in a move meant to show their commitment to holding talks with the government. But this decision to stop weeks of demonstrations is dependent on President Carlos Alvarado's promise to initiate talks to address the demands of citizens. Protest leaders also highlighted the brutal repression faced by nationals at the hands of the police. Costa Rica, once categorized as a Central American success story, has been gripped by nationwide protests over the past weeks after the government started negotiations to acquire a massive loan from the International Monetary Fund. Chilean police violently repressed protests on Friday ahead of the anniversary of last year's massive anti-government mobilizations. In the midst of the violence, at least one person was run over by a police vehicle, while several others were arrested. The police also used tear gas and water cannons against protesters. On Friday, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador announced that former Defense Minister Salvador Cienfuegos was arrested in the U.S. on drug trafficking and money laundering charges.
Esto es una muestra.
This is an unmistakable example of the decomposition of the government, of how civil service was degrading the government service during the neoliberal period. All those who are currently in the government, in the defense secretary, and are involved in this matter of General Cienfuegos will be suspended, withdrawn, and if it's the case, taken to the relevant authorities.
We have more stories coming up. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. The mobilizations of Colombia's indigenous peoples, known as the Social Minga, has arrived to the Department of Tolima. Nearly 3,000 indigenous people are on their way to Bogota, where close to 10,000 people are expected to come together in support of peace. This mobilization previously headed to the city of Cali, where they hoped to meet with President Ivan Duque. But the president ignored all requests for talks. An Argentinian court has ordered the immediate release of Milagro Sala, the persecuted leader of the Tupac Amaru Neighborhood Association, who was sentenced to 13 years in prison for alleged extortion and illicit association. But after the ruling, Sala's defense team filed a complaint since the court decided to absolve Sala for only one of the cases that was brought against her. Salah is set to be released in the coming days and must remain under house arrest. Shifting gears now, in a historic case, a Tunisian court has ruled to allow a man to drop a name linked to slavery. The court ruled in favor of allowing 80-year-old Hamdan Dali to remove the word atig from his name, a word which translates to freed. Such names are common in Africa and were forcibly given to people by their slave masters decades ago. UN officials have warned of an unprecedented crisis in Africa's Sahel region as escalating violence, rising levels of food insecurity, forced displacement, and the impact of the pandemic could lead to the world's worst humanitarian crisis.
The humanitarian situation has deteriorated sharply over the past 2 years. Needs are rising faster than funding can keep up. People living in the border region between Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are now at an epicenter of conflict, poverty, and climate change.
The Central Sahel countries of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are the epicenter of the forced displacement crisis. More than 1.5 internally displaced people, IDPs, and 365,000 refugees have fled violence in the Central Sahel, including over 600,000 this year alone.
A record 7.2 million children in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger now require humanitarian assistance. This is up 2/3 in just 1 year. Over 1 million children have been forcibly displaced from their homes. Safe water, so critical for the survival of young children and for preventing COVID-19, is scarcer than ever, particularly so among those displaced.
A concerning situation, to say the least. We're taking one last break. Stay with us. Welcome back. On Friday, the World Health Organization announced that the total number of new COVID-19 cases reported in Europe last week was triple the number reported during the first week of March, back at the start of the pandemic.
It isn't just the increasing case numbers that we're seeing. It's the increasing in hospitalization and the increase in the number of individuals who are in ICU. We know of a number of cities across Europe where ICU capacity will be reached in the coming weeks. And that is concerning as we approach the flu season.
Each country has had to take a different approach in this response, and each country has had to determine what its social contract is and what is possible within the context of the relationship that government has with people. We would, as WHO, say that masks are an important part of the strategic approach, a comprehensive approach to stopping the spread of this disease.
French President Emmanuel Macron has reiterated the EU's willingness to reach a final post-Brexit trade agreement, while highlighting that negotiations required effort from British authorities.
We want an agreement, and we are aware that this requires efforts, particularly from the UK. But let's keep in mind that it is the UK that wanted to leave the EU, and needs an agreement, much more than we do. Fishing is a topic used tactically by the British. Why? Because in the case of a no deal, it is the only subject on which Boris Johnson can say I won. If there is no deal, European fishermen will have no access to the British waters at all. In case of no deal, our fishermen will have no access to British waters. That is right. But in case of no deal, the United Kingdom has no access to the European energy system, to our energy single market. That costs them more than €1 billion a year. I am not an undercover Brexiter, but it's a bad deal for the UK.
Meanwhile, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez called for the inclusion of bilateral negotiations with the United Kingdom regarding the British overseas territory of Gibraltar.
We want the commercial deal to include references to our interests, such as air travel, and also the bilateral negotiations that we are having with the UK on Gibraltar and what will be its situation after the exit of the UK from the EU. What all the members of the European Council have proposed and said is that in the first place, we are absolutely ready to make an agreement with the UK. We want to have the best possible relationship with the UK, with a third country like the UK, with whom we already have a very close relationship. But the agreement cannot be at any price.
Hospitality industry workers took to the streets of Barcelona on Friday to protest against new restrictions aimed at curbing the spread of the novel coronavirus. Protesters gathered outside City Hall and the regional presidency headquarters to protest an order for bars and restaurants to close for the next 15 days. Catalan authorities have promised aid funds of about €40 million for businesses affected by these restrictions. But union representatives have claimed that the aid package only represents 5.1% of the losses. On that note, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Doris Polo. Thank you so much for watching.